Gunfights roaring in the streets. Robberies at the train station. A town so violent that terrified travelers would dive under the train cars for cover. This was Palisade, Nevada, by all accounts, one of the most dangerous towns in the entire Wild West. Except, none of it was real. The gunfights were fake. The robberies were a put-on. And the victims were back on their feet in time for the next train. This is the story of how a little railroad town faked its own violent reputation and fooled America in the process. The legend of Palisade. To get the Great Palisade hoax, you first have to understand the world it was born into. In the years after the Civil War, America was obsessed with the West. The country was expanding, the frontier was shrinking, and a powerful new mythology was taking shape. Dime novels, sold for pennies back east, were telling sensational stories of heroic lawmen, ruthless outlaws, and a land where justice came from the barrel of a gun. For travelers heading west on the new transcontinental railroad, this was the America they were expecting to see. They'd read the stories, and now they wanted to see them come to life, even if it was just from the safety of a train car window. And for a little while in the 1870s, it seemed like the small railroad town of Palisade, Nevada, was the best place to get that experience. Founded in 1868 as a station for the Central Pacific Railroad, Palisade was a key transportation hub for the mining districts nearby. But according to the stories that started spreading, it was something way more exciting, a true, untamed slice of the frontier. Travelers and a few journalists would share some harrowing tales. As their train pulled into the station, the sleepy desert quiet would suddenly be shattered by gunfire. Cowboys would face off in dramatic duels. Posses would chase down criminals. Some stories even told of dramatic hangings right there on the platform. It was, by all appearances, total chaos. Passengers would scream, faint, or dive for cover. The town quickly earned a legendary reputation, a place spoken of in fearful whispers as one of the most violent spots west of Chicago. But the most incredible thing about this most violent town wasn't the number of gunfights. It was the fact that none of them were real. A town in search of a story, so why? Why would an entire community get together to pull off this elaborate stunt? The answer, just like the hoax itself, is a mix of smart thinking and showmanship. The most popular origin story for the hoax is a perfect snapshot of the era. As the legend goes, passengers on the westward trains were getting disappointed. They journeyed for days across the plains, their heads full of adventure, only to find the real West was often quiet, dusty, and honestly, a little boring. One day, a train conductor supposedly complained to a Palisade local about his bored passengers, and an idea was sparked. If the tourists wanted a Wild West show, why not give them one? There's also a second, simpler reason. The folks in Palisade might have been just as bored as the tourists. Life in a remote railroad town could be incredibly dull. Staging elaborate pranks wasn't just for outsiders, it was a way for them to make their own fun. In reality, Palisade seems to have been a remarkably peaceful place. Violent crime was reportedly so low that some say the town didn't have its own dedicated marshal or local jail. When law enforcement was needed, the Elko County Sheriff's Department, miles away, would handle it. The town was, for all intents and purposes, a quiet, hard-working supply depot. But its residents saw an opportunity. They saw the hunger in the eyes of the tourists, the desire to believe the myths were true. And they decided to give the people what they wanted. The performance of a lifetime. Sometime in the early 1870s, the people of Palisade started their grand performance. It wasn't just one event, but a whole series of plays that would erupt whenever a train pulled into the station. It was a community effort, although the idea that every single citizen was an actor is probably an overstatement. Still, a good number of the townspeople, from businessmen to railroad workers, were in on the act. The performances were surprisingly elaborate. The classic show was the gunfight. Two men would start a fake argument, pistols would be drawn, and then all hell would break loose. They used blank ammunition, so while there was plenty of smoke and noise, the only thing in danger was the audience's nerves. After a dramatic shootout, one of the victims would hit the ground. Fellow townspeople would rush in, carry the body off, often into a saloon, and disarm the killer. The horrified passengers rarely stuck around long enough to see the dead man get up inside the saloon, ready for the next train. As the story goes, the show's repertoire grew. The most consistent reports are about the shootouts, but some of the more colorful retellings of the legend include staged brawls and even Indian attacks. These accounts claim that members of local Native American tribes were sometimes paid to participate, riding into town to the terror of the passengers, only to be driven back by the brave citizens. These shows are said to have run for a few years, but the legend of Palisade grew with each telling. It had successfully transformed itself from a sleepy whistle stop into a must-see, if terrifying, tourist attraction. It was one of America's first immersive theme parks. The only difference was, the guests didn't know it was a show. The hoax upon a hoax, but this is where the story takes another turn. How do we actually know all this happened? The truth is, the hard evidence is surprisingly thin. While the story is a cherished piece of Nevada folklore, told and retold by local historians, there aren't many primary sources from the time that confirm it. The idea that newspapers all across the country were writing about a lawless Palisade seems to be a later embellishment. The lack of contemporary press is one of the biggest reasons for skepticism. This has led some to a fascinating thought. What if the story of the Palisade hoax is itself a hoax? A hoax upon a hoax? Could the tale of an entire town staging gunfights be a tall tale that got mistaken for history? It's a compelling idea. There's a certain poetry to the thought that America's greatest hoax town might be a fiction itself. While it's tough to prove one way or the other, most historians believe the performances, in some form, did happen. The story is too specific and fits too perfectly with the era's Wild West obsession to be completely made up. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. A few locals staged some pranks, and over the years, the story snowballed into the grand, theatrical legend we know today. The final curtain, whether it was a deliberate choice or the novelty just wore off, the great Palisade performances seem to have faded away by the mid to late 1870s. But the town's flair for the dramatic wasn't quite finished. In 1932, Palisade popped back into the national spotlight with a sensational story about a thwarted assassination attempt on President Herbert Hoover. A railroad guard claimed to have found two men with dynamite near a trestle, supposedly planning to blow up the president's train. However, subsequent investigations cast serious doubt on the story, and many now believe the guard might have fabricated the incident. The spirit of the hoax, it seems, lived on. The town itself, though, couldn't survive on stories. Palisade's decline was slow and gradual. The nearby mining operations that fed its economy started to dwindle after 1885. Railroad traffic changed. A major flood in 1910 caused huge damage, but it was just another step in a long, slow decline. The population shrank, businesses closed, and the town faded away. The official end came in 1961 when the post office was discontinued. Today, Palisade is a ghost town, with only a few crumbling foundations left to mark the spot where the Wild West was once so convincingly, and so peacefully, performed. The story of Palisade, Nevada, is more than just a historical prank. It's a perfect metaphor for how the myth of the American West was built. It wasn't always a reality to be documented, but a story to be told, a performance designed to meet the expectations of a willing audience. The travelers wanted to see a Wild West of danger and excitement, and the people of Palisade were more than happy to sell them a ticket to the show. It brings up a fascinating question. What's more powerful, the truth of what happened, or the story we tell about it? In Palisade, the story won. The legend of a violent, lawless town completely buried the reality of a peaceful, clever community. It's a potent reminder that history isn't just what happened, but what we choose to remember, and sometimes, what we choose to invent. If you enjoy uncovering these hidden corners of history, think about subscribing. We'll see you next time.